What's up, everybody, and welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com. I'm Jacob Turner. He's Andrew Jones. We're here for another edition of the THI podcast. And the gist of this conversation, AJ, is going to be something we've been talking, I know, off camera about for quite some time now. And I think we've talked about it on podcast a little bit as well. But with the offseason being officially here, we felt like it was an appropriate time to discuss Carolina needing to get back to being elite again and why that needs to be the main focus for Hubert Davis and co. this offseason, in particular when it comes to building his new roster. So a lot of different avenues we can approach this conversation. I know you're doing a daily drop series looking at what Carolina needs to do in the portal. So you guys definitely go check that one out when you get a chance. That's a 4-part video series we're rolling out this week. But again, let me illustrate some of the facts and stats about why we're having this conversation to kind of show where Carolina used to be and kind of where it finds itself at right now. Just to focus on this past season, ended 23-14. Only 6 other teams in the program's history have finished with more losses than that. Carolina's finished with 10 or more losses now in 6 of the last 8 seasons. Haven't won 30-plus games since 2016-17. And this is one right here that I think illustrates it too. Looking at Carolina's NCAA tournament resume since the 1920 season, which was the COVID year, Carolina obviously didn't go to the tournament because there wasn't one that year and wouldn't have got in anyway. But they've been an 8 seed twice, a 1 seed once, an 11 seed once. And again, like I said, missed the tourney essentially twice in the COVID season and in the 2022-23 season. So those are just a few facts you can kind of run through to show where Carolina is currently at right now and why it's not anywhere near the standard that this program has set for years and years and years. So, AJ, let's start with this. When we say elite, let's talk about what that means. What does elite mean to you in regards to talking about Carolina basketball? Because elite is a very broad topic. It can mean a ton of different things.
I think if you carve out the transition from Guthridge to Doherty in that period, elite is 1967 through 2019. It's a long time.
Yeah.
And it was sustained there. Kansas has done something similarly, but it's interesting. Gonzaga, some people were talking on TV that recently about Gonzaga's streak of getting to Sweet 16s, and it's unheard of to do it 7 years in a row or 8 years in a row. Like when North Carolina did it 10 years in a row, when the 1 seed Dean Smith had lower, he had a 6 seed in 96, and then they were an 8 seed in 90. Otherwise, they were a 4 or better or higher. And when they were an 8 in 90, they beat number 1 Oklahoma in the second round. So Rick Fox shot the King Rice high step dance that's so famous, and they play in the Smith Center. That was their 10th straight Sweet 16. I remember they put out a T-shirt said "A decade of the Sweet 16" or something like that. That the standard is that was the minimum. I mean, the minimum was you beat the best team in the country and you get to the Sweet 16. That was the standard. That's elite. What's happened recently is since 2019, Carolina's won an NCAA tournament game on a Thursday or Friday in just 2 different years. That's not elite at all. The fact that they would have missed, you could argue if they belonged in this year. Most people say they didn't, and I think you can make a case for both. Probably a better case for not being in some respects.
Especially after the Ole Miss game, yeah.
Yeah, it would have been 3 out of, they were not competitive, and that's one of the things we've outlined this week. And it's not been our mission to push this narrative. It's just more, okay, what is North Carolina basketball right now? Mm-hmm. What is it? What is it trying to accomplish? Is it trying to accomplish what it's been for decades with loose parts, or is there a firm organizational process that has proven that that works? Well, it's hard to sort of have that now because things have changed so much. Yeah. But it's been all over the place. It's caroming. Mm-hmm. It's like that flight I had connecting from Chicago to Milwaukee, throwing our asses around, man.
You had a lot of turbulence on that one?
Just a tad bit. And It's a good thing there's a little boy on the flight. Little boy about 5 thought it was the greatest thing he'd ever been on before.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, all the adults are like, no. And the little kid's like, let's do it again. So, but
ignorance is bliss sometimes. Right?
Yeah. And ignorance is bliss with North Carolina when people are like, well, they went to the title game in 22 and they were 1 seed last year. You're missing everything else.
Mm-hmm.
It's like looking at a skyline from a distance and you have a couple of majestic buildings, but there's a lot of crap underneath. Mm-hmm. Like the filter's not good. And there's a lot of closed down buildings and stuff. That's kind of been North Carolina for a while now. North Carolina's mission this spring needs to be getting back to elite status. Mm-hmm. And even last year as a 1 seed, if that was a regular year and that had followed up a 1 seed and it preceded a 1 seed, then I would say that's elite. Because nobody's had more Final Fours. Nobody's had more number 1 seeds. Nobody's won more NCAA tournament games. Kentucky is 1 behind now. Mm-hmm. 134 to 133. Carolina's elite. The only mission should be elite. Mm-hmm. I don't know if elite is being pushed enough because there's an awful lot of, I'm proud of this team, and I'm not singling out Hubert here, but it's going to sound like it. But I do think there's a segment of the fan base that is very defensive over the small achievements. But I illustrated this week in some stuff, and we're going to continue to do it, of Carolina versus the quad 1 teams they played, quad 1 games of teams that are in the NCAA tournament. It's really stark when you look at the differences. For example, in the 11 games they played against quad 1 games they played against teams in the NCAA tournament, Carolina gave up 91.9 points on average. And the other 26 opponents, 67.4. In the 245 minutes of game action of those 11 quad 1 games against teams in the NCAA tournament, Carolina led for 33 minutes. Mm-hmm. They allowed almost 50% shooting. Everybody else, it's 40%. They allowed 40% 3-point shooting. Everybody else, it's 30%. So Carolina is really far from being elite. When it played elite teams this year, it was completely dominated. Completely dominated. The numbers bear it out.
Yeah.
So now that they're in the portal, you lose an Elliot Cadeau. Well, who do you replace him with? Someone who's about like Elliot Cadeau? You lose a Jalen Washington. Do you replace him with someone who's kind of like Jalen Washington? You have to replace going up in order for the team next year to have a chance at being elite. And let's remember, they played a crap schedule in the conference this year, and they still struggled. So, but they've proven that they're pretty good against those kind of teams. So if they were in the Missouri Valley Conference, they would have had Drake's record.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if they were in the SEC, what would they have been? Mm-hmm. They wouldn't even have been the NIT. Because Ole Miss, 10-8 in the SEC, thumped them. I mean, they're 0-4 against the SEC. Auburn beat them by double digits. Alabama came into Chapel Hill, clobbered them. Florida closes them out 14-0. 4 offensive rebounds, 8 second chance points in the last 5 minutes. And we saw what Ole Miss did. Everyone said, yeah, well, Sean Padula. Really? Well, Sean Padula, yeah, really?
Yeah, he was big time in that game.
So to be very long-winded here, the mission should be elite. So how do they get to elite? How does the current staff with GM sit down and say, we're trading players? Because that's what the portal is now. Mm-hmm. So how do we trade up? How do we get more value coming in than what's leaving? Because that's how you get to elite. Mm-hmm. I think it's a huge question. And they've just lost 2 elite perimeter shooters. RJ shot 43.5% from the perimeter over the last 19 games. Jay Witt shot 48.2% from the perimeter over the last 12 games. He shot over 40% for the season. His last year at Louisville, he was over 40%. He's an elite perimeter shooter, period. How do they replace that? How do they get another elite point guard? Someone who's a little bit better than Elliott, maybe better defensively, maybe he has more vitality, maybe a better leader. What kind of reinforcement do they get off the bench up front that is an upgrade from Jay Wash? There's a lot that they have to do to become elite again. And that's what the mission of this offseason is this spring. And I think it's the most fascinating thing because you have to ask what is the mission? Has to be elite. And if it's not elite, then there needs to be some hard conversations in Chapel Hill.
Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt about that. Let's talk about what we know right now about who's left the program. I mean, we're recording this at a time where the only people who've left the program as of right now in the portal are Elliot Cadeau and Jalen Washington. And you just mentioned a little bit of them a second ago, but it's an interesting one because I think we hopped on the podcast the day before and saying, we're not really surprised that either of those guys left. I think there was expectation amongst Carolina fans that both of them would likely leave. I think Cadeau was a little bit more of a surprise than Jay Wash to some people, but I don't know if he was necessarily a big surprise. But you see guys like that leaving the program, in particular a guy like Elliot Cadeau, just starting point guard the last 2 years, bundles of talent, but for whatever reason, just maybe hasn't been the type of player that Carolina fans thought they were getting. When you look at those guys leaving, AJ, what do you think Jim Tanner and Hubert Davis are trying to accomplish there? Is it these guys don't work? They've proven that they're not good enough for what we need and the place we need to get to? Or is it, hey, we wouldn't have mind keeping them, but we can't sit here and say that you're going to be a guaranteed playing time. We're going to go out and recruit over you because of the position we're in right now. What do you make of those two guys in particular? Because again, you mentioned guys at RJ Withers. You're already losing those guys just because they're out of eligibility. Now you've got two other guys leaving, one in particular who I said who was your starting point guard. So now you've got even more roster rebuilding to do. For me, it signifies a really, really strong indication that there's going to be a massive rebuild going on this offseason, because I'd be absolutely shocked if they're the only two guys who leave the program this offseason in the portal. So what do you think those two guys, again, at the time of recording, the only ones that have left, what do you think those two guys in particular maybe signified for what they're trying to do this offseason?
I think everybody's got their own unique story and their own unique set of reasons. But as a program, if you want to take a broader view, what is one thing Hubert Davis was comfortable talking about all year long, almost lamenting about it? And that was how quiet the team was. This is a team that lacked vocal leadership, and it reflected in a lot of areas on the court. Being courtside, I never heard the guards talking on the court defensively. You would hear the main big. Jay Wash, to his credit, talked. He was talking a lot in the Ole Miss game. But the guards never talked. I mean, they're just silent.
It's just personality, because that's what it feels like.
I think a lot of it's personality, but you and I have talked for you. I asked Hubert a question a few years ago. It was the Pete Nance year about not having the term is fanny smackers. And we've talked about fanny smackers before, and Hubert laughed because he was asked a question about fanny smackers. I think it threw him off, and he knew what I was talking about. But this team lacked fanny smackers. If you think about elite point guards, if the whole mission is to be elite, elite means getting to a Final Four. Elite means being a 1 seed. Look at the point guards for all the 1 seeds Carolina's had this century. Raymond Felton, Ty Lawson, Kendall Marshall, Joel Berry, Kobe White. None of them were silent players.
No.
They were very vocal players. They were fanny smacker type players. They knew how to smack their own fannies.
They were dogs.
As the point guard, they're the quarterbacks, and they were that on both ends of the floor. Go back and look at how disruptive Joel was defensively against Gonzaga in the national championship game. He scored 20-plus points in consecutive national title games. The only guy to do that since Bill Walton. But it was his toughness. It was his chatter. It was how unbreakable he was, which is why he was the MOP in 2017 and why that team was in those 2 games and were a long shot away from maybe winning back-to-back national titles. Mm-hmm. So Elliot didn't have all that. Elliot's a wonderful talent, and maybe Elliot will eventually graduate to that level. But I think time had run out in Chapel Hill for all kinds of reasons, including theirs. Maybe it was just a point where maybe it's best for both parties to move on. Elliot is going to be really good wherever he goes, and I'll be happy for him. And because it'll be that's one of the great things about the portal. You can correct a wrong pretty quickly. Yeah. You feel like, okay, this is not the best place for me. You don't have to sit out. Some guys would stay because they'd have to sit out. They don't want to lose that year. He can go somewhere else and excel. Maybe it's a situation where there's other vocal guys, so he doesn't need to be that vocal. But North Carolina, historically, you got to have those guys. Mm-hmm. Derek Phelps was vocal. Jimmy Black was vocal. I could go on about those kind of players, and you need them. So Hubert doesn't want to have a quiet team. He wants to have a louder team, a team that communicates on the floor, a team in which all 5 guys are talking. There are teams that I've seen in college basketball this year, I'm not going to name them, where you heard all 5 guys talking. I've covered football teams. They said sometimes the communication is not great on the offensive line. Maybe there's only one guy talking. There needs to be a couple guys talking, not just the setup. The guards need to talk too. They have a little different vantage point than the center. And the offensive lines that communicate in game are the better offensive lines, provided the talent level. It's the same thing in basketball. So I think that's part of the uptick of what they want. More communication. They want a grittier bunch. One of the things that in that 4 podcast series we're doing, the 4th one was dogs. They didn't have any dogs this year. I think RJ has dog elements to him. I think Seth does. I think Van Allen Lubin does. But there was no Ingram. There was no Ryan. I had a whole outline of all the really good teams Carolina's had. All the 1 seeds all had dogs. Mm-hmm. A lot of them had 3 and 4. Think of all the dogs in 08, because Ginyard didn't play in 09. So 08, yeah, Hansbrough. Lawson was a dog. Danny Green was a dog. Ginyard was a dog. They were all over the place on that team. That's why he kicked everyone's rear. Not to mention that they were super talented and very coachable and smart and had great chemistry. North Carolina needs to be elite. Elite North Carolina teams are vocal. Elite North Carolina teams have fanny smackers and screw you guys. And elite North Carolina teams have talent. They have players that can put the ball in the hole. So that's hard to get, and it's expensive to get in the portal now, but you can do it. Look at the additions the team 8 miles down the road made. Great additions. They filled in the cracks perfectly. And they're very fortunate that a couple of those freshmen are just phenomenal. They're as advertised. It's been a while since Carolina's had a freshman that's as advertised for a variety of reasons. So there's a lot that needs to be achieved, Jacob. It's like climbing Machu Picchu. It's going to take a while, but you can get there. But North Carolina used to always be on top of Machu Picchu. Now they got to figure out how to get back up there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny because the stuff you're talking about right there, when we're having a conversation about communication, I mean, it's the minimum for a good team. You have to have communication, be a good team. We talk about it all the time. It doesn't really matter what any sport. You have to have a vocal team, in my opinion, to be an elite team. Carolina didn't have that last year. These are minimum things that we're talking about. I think, maybe to focus on a positive real quick, do you think this coaching staff and maybe even Jim Tanner can look and say, well, and kind of look at the 23-24 team and say, well, we've got a sample of what we can do? Because I thought Hubert did a fantastic job coaching that team. And I also think he did a fantastic job, more importantly, in my opinion, building that roster and getting the type of guys in that he needed to get, the Harrison Ingrams, the Cormac Ryans. And then you throw a guy like Armando in there who has that leadership ability and the talent. RJ in there who has an All-American ACC Player of the Year type season. It's not like Hubert is again in this position where he's just failed to put together a good roster in his tenure. There is a sample in there that shows that he can do it. Now he's got a little more help to do it. Do you think there's any truth in maybe saying, okay, that 23-24 team is an example and a blueprint of how we need to go about doing it, but at the same time, there's a big difference between having maybe something to look at and saying we did a really good job there and actually going out and replicating that again. That's not as easy as it's a lot easier said than done.
When you brought in guys like Ingram, who's really smart and an autopilot kind of player, a lot of that takes care of itself. Cormac
He was
Ryan,
a dog too. I think him and Cormac were dogs.
Yeah. And Cormac Ryan, another autopilot player. Armando was in his 5th year, autopilot player. RJ was in his 4th year, ACC Player of the Year, autopilot player. this year. Then you had Elliott as a freshman. Elliott just needed to do his job, and that was it. He didn't have to be a lot of things that you want your point guard to be, maybe when he's an older point guard. You look at this year's team, how many autopilot guys did they have? RJ was autopilot, but it took him 2 months to figure out how to get shots off without a screener. And then when he did, he was elite. RJ was outstanding the last 2 months of the season. Outstanding. Mm-hmm. And people are still fixated on his shooting percentages early. As it turns out, 43.5% of the last 19 games, good sample size. So he figured it out, to his credit. And he was also pretty good on the ball, better on the ball this year than he was a year ago, for sure. I think he's an autopilot guy. But everyone else, it took them all year to figure it out because they're changing roles. The starting lineup's changing. They weren't vocal. There wasn't a lot of confidence. There wasn't nearly as much experience on the roster. So I'm not trying to take anything away from Hubert at all, but it was an easier job last season than it was this season because of who you had on the roster. So one of the things they have to do through the portal is to make the job easier. How do you do that? Super talented guys, self-motivated autopilot guys that play with vitality and grit and communicate, and guys that are highly competitive. And the fifth thing is bring together a group that then meshes together. If those 5 things are done, the head coach doesn't need to always be great on every decision he makes. But Hubert was in a situation this year where a year ago, maybe you don't call timeout during a 10-2 run by whoever because Harrison's going to get you a bucket. RJ's going to get you a bucket. They're going to settle down. They're going to clamp down and get a couple stops, and the 10-2 run dies at 10-2. Whereas this year, they didn't have that as much. So Hubert may have applied the exact same approach with this group, and the 10-2 run turns into 17-4 because they don't have guys to stop it. They don't have guys that are on autopilot and know how to kind of elevate in this moment to get this thing switched, flip the course of where it's going. There was a lot of looking around on the floor this year. It was a younger team. It was a less experienced team. It wasn't as talented from a refinement standpoint. And Hubert, I think, struggled coaching a group that needed more coaching. They needed more coddling. They needed that, but also needed accountability to elevate. I think he struggled with that. Last year's group was more to his liking. Hubert could tell them one thing and they go out and do it. But this group, I can't tell you how many times where the fans from the upper deck may think Hubert's getting on an official. He's getting on players. I mean, during free throw situations, he's constantly shouting specifics to certain players about something that just happened. I don't recall him doing that as much last year. Roy, when he coached, he was reminding them to box out. Every time a free throw, you would hear him yell box out. I never hear Hubert say that because Hubert's always picking at something that didn't maybe go right. Or you've got to fight through the screen differently. You've got to go around the screen. You got to switch better or, set the screen harder. All kinds of little things that I think Hubert kind of felt like he was never fully caught up with where the team was this year because of all those loose ends. And part of the loose ends were his responsibility. Part of them was because of his bad roster composition, which was his responsibility. And part of it was just some guys weren't as good as they thought they were going to be. If Jay Wash was as good as they thought, if Cade Tyson would have provided them what they thought he was going to and what the entire universe thought he was going to, Hubert's job would have been easier. He wouldn't have gotten so much criticism. They wouldn't have played in Dayton, and they might still be in the tournament right now.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue, and we talked about it a lot last season, it was just I go back to the start with it. Like you just said, it was the roster composition. It was just something in hindsight that, again, you were never going to know if it was actually going to work until we actually saw a sample size of it, which is kind of what we preached early in the year of telling people. I mean, AJ, I did a drop telling people to pump the brakes because they were freaking out early in the season. I look like an idiot for doing that drop now because there were legitimate reasons to say, hey, yeah, maybe this team is flawed with how the roster is flawed with how it's been built. But now that we've got hindsight to look at, yeah, I think last year's team was almost, that you fail in the offseason, you don't really have any hope going when the season comes because you didn't build the correct roster that you need to. I think you could say the exact opposite about the previous years when you got into the season. But just look at the way 23-24 Carolina started off ACC play. I mean, this was a team that, again, there were some growing pains with it, and they did underachieve in the tournament, in my opinion, but that was a good team. So there's a sample size there, but that came down to building the correct roster. And it's not always about how, well, this guy's a good shooter, let's bring him in, like a Tyson. He was one of the top shooters in the class, AJ, in the portal class. It didn't work out at North Carolina. I think a lot of that had to do with personality. And I think a lot of last year's failures had to do with personality too. I think it's one thing to recruit skills. You have to recruit personality and make sure that their mental also matches with the physical, because we're not, again, I've said this before, we're not talking about Virginia Tech. We're not talking about Clemson basketball. Clemson's a good program now. We're talking about Carolina basketball where the expectations are so much higher, and where when you walk in the Smith Center and you look up, that's the precedent that's been set. And some players can't handle that, and that's fine. That happens. I mean, not everybody's going to be able to come in and handle the pressures that come with playing for North Carolina. I think there was some of that last year. Now, we did see growth from certain individuals. Vin Allen Lubin's a guy that sticks out, but it took him a while to figure it out. You can't afford to have that every season where, yeah, they're starting to figure it out by February. No, this has to be something that starts early in the season. And then, when you're hitting that December time period, early November, when you're diving into ACC play, that's when you have to have these guys start to figure it out, not by January. So I think a lot of last season's failures were just down to building a roster that ultimately didn't work, and also utilizing the team you have in an incorrect way. Because, AJ, how many podcasts did we spend talking about what the heck is Carolina trying to do offensively here? So it's not just about roster composition. It's about backing up a correct roster composition with the correct coaching and the way in execution of what you're asking your guys to do. So I think last year was a failure in many different ways, but I think the quickest way to remediate that now is in the portal, and that is a positive. I don't ever think you're as far away as you think you are in today's world, because you can go out and essentially rebuild your roster in one offseason. So I think that is another positive, but you got to go out and build that correct roster. And ultimately, AJ, you're just never going to know if it's right or not until you actually get into the thick of the season when the bullets really start flying. So I don't want to focus on priorities in the class or in the portal because you're doing a drop series on that, but just a bigger picture kind of element. What do you think the main objective and main goal needs to be for Jim Tanner and Hubert Davis this offseason? Because like I said, there will be more guys that leave. I'd be absolutely shocked if there weren't. There is a ton of talent in the portal that can be picked up and utilized, and if you bring them in. Is the focus building a taller team? Is the focus building a more physical and athletic team? Is the focus building a team that can shoot the ball better? Because when I look at last year's team, I look at that 3 small guard lineup and I say, I don't know if you can do that again, because I'm not sure that works in this area of college basketball. And if you're going to have a small guard lineup, you better have some dogs and some big guys down low. Carolina didn't really have that either. So bigger picture, do you think it's kind of an element of all that where we need to be more physical, we need to be taller, we need to be bigger, we need to be better shooters? Or are there certain things that Hubert Davis and Jim Tanner kind of are going to hone in on specifically to bring in? Does that make sense what I'm trying to ask there?
Yeah, it does. And honestly, it's a great question. I'm going to go back to the numbers. 91.9 points versus 67.4 allowed. 245 game minutes against quad one games of teams in the NCAA tournament. They led for 33 minutes. They need shooting. They need rebounding. They need defense. They need to be taller. They need to be everything. They need to be more. They need to be better communication. They need to have better chemistry. They need to fight more. They need to fight together more. They need to not put so much in Hubert's hands. And I don't mean that to say he's not a good coach, but the more a coach has to massage every game, the more mistakes they're going to make, the more it's going to look like you're not doing the job because they can't control. When it looks like a coach has to try to control games a lot, it's usually not a winning recipe. When you watch really, really good teams play, you're not thinking, boy, Danny Hurley made another great move there. You're not thinking that way. You're not thinking that, boy, Bruce Pearl just made a great substitution. It just happens. So you're not thinking too much about when a team forces coaches to have to make a lot of moves and have to constantly think about the lineup on the floor. And boy, I better get this guy in there because that guy's struggling. Or you put a guy in the game and he hits the side of the backboard on a three-pointer and you got to get him out because he got burned defensively because he got pinned down on a screen and didn't get out and left open a wide-open perimeter shooter who swished the ball. You force coaches to have to make decisions, and the more decisions they make, the more wrong ones are going to make, and people are going to highlight them.
You have to micromanage the team more, which is not a recipe for success.
Yeah, you have to have a roster that doesn't need micromanaging, and that's going to cost a lot of money. You have to upgrade across the board. That's why this is such a crucial year because, look, the truth of it is Hubert's going to be on a warm seat when the season starts next year. And rightfully so. This is North Carolina basketball. The fact that we're talking about the massive cavern between where UNC basketball is and being elite, which is where UNC once was for 5 decades straight, basically, that's not a good sign. Ultimately, the buck stops where? The buck stops with the head coach. So Hubert has been given another year with the GM to make it work. If there's more of the same next year, then there are going to be some very difficult conversations had in Chapel Hill. And it won't be between player and coach. So this is a massive spring. It's a massive spring on 1,000 levels, but you've got to, Carolina basketball has to get back to being Carolina basketball. Mm-hmm. There's nothing about Carolina basketball this season, if you look at it as a whole. The 30,000-foot view is it was not. They wore the uniforms. They went back and tried to wear the Dean Smith uniforms more than ever before, even on the road. They weren't that. So upgrade everywhere. Everything you said, the answer is yes. Mm-hmm. You could ask me a dozen other questions, and I would say yes. They need to get better in all those areas.
Yeah.
They weren't a terrible team, but in Carolina standards, they were. Mm. A lot of fans like us, the worst Carolina team I've ever seen. Well, I covered 8-20. I covered 22 of their 28 games, and that was a terrible team. 14-19, I think I covered every one of thear games. I
covered a lot of them.
It was a bad team. It's a flawed team. This club was far more talented than 14-19. And it was far more talented and I think had better voices in the room than 8-20. 8-20 had some voices that weren't great in the room. And then they also had a head coach who at the time was not equipped to be North Carolina's head coach for different reasons. That was a long time ago. I'm not going to dog him over that. So this is different now. You got a hand-picked guy by the legend. You've got more talent than the record. I mean, they should have been better than what the record said. Mm-hmm. But they still are not elite. They're not 2017. And 2017 didn't have a bunch of NBA guys, but it was an elite coaching job and it was elite chemistry. It was tons of grit and it was enough skill to get the job done. And a whole lot of want. There's a lot that needs to upgrade. But the portal gives you the opportunity. You are North Carolina. Look at what Kentucky did with an entirely new roster. They're in the Sweet 16 now. Mm-hmm. And they're playing a Tennessee team that they know. They can beat Tennessee. They got a rah-rah former player as a coach. It can work. But you got to do a great job in the portal. Jim Tanner's the most important man in Chapel Hill right now.
Yeah, no pressure or anything.
Yeah, no pressure.
Good luck, man.
But Hubert, you just got this job. Hubert's going to say yay or nay.
Yeah, it ultimately is.
The difference is you've seen activity already. So just to throw names out there, it's easy to know Isaac McNeely because you've scouted him. Mm-hmm. But Donovan Dent, it's easy to know Nathan George, who, by the way, hit the portal yesterday from Georgia Tech, who I think someone they should be interested in. The kid from Indiana, Malik Brunel, I think is his name. Yeah, the kid from Indiana that they're interested. They were already prepared for a lot of these guys. So, for example, Dent hits the portal and he hears from Carolina immediately, and they already know what kind of player he is.
Mm-hmm.
A year ago, that wasn't the case. A year ago, we're in LA. They played Friday, Sunday in LA, right? Or they played Friday in LA. They were eliminated.
Yes.
So we were just traveling to LA this time a year ago, and the team is out there, and Hubert's not worried about the portal. So the portal dates are stupid. They should be pushed back. But he lost time last year because they were playing. And then he had some of these stipulations that extended things well into May as well. I don't think it's going to extend well into May this year. They're going to get their guys because they're full bore right now.
Yeah, I think they should do their business early. I think if you're smart, you absolutely should. And again, Carolina's in a position to do that this year because their season ended, almost a week ago now. Last thing.
Classes end like in 5 weeks.
Oh, no?
5-6 weeks, 6 weeks, your exams. So you go out and get a guy, he finishes where he is. He could be in Chapel Hill in 7 weeks, working out.
And that's what you want. Again, you want guys in as early as possible.
That would be what? Let's say mid-May. So you got June, July, August, September, October. It's almost 6 months before they even play a game.
And that's big. I mean, that plays
time to build chemistry.
Mm-hmm. They need that. You absolutely need that. Let's end it on this. I want to ask you this question. I've got Carolina's kind of records pulled up, and I just noticed something else. Carolina's only finished ranked one time in the final AP poll in the last 6 years, going back to 1920. And that was 23-24 when they finished 7th. That, again, just illustrates where Carolina's at right now. And I'm looking at all the other history that, the amount of number 1 and 2 seeds I'm seeing right now, AJ, just from pretty much 18-19 to 2007, 2008, it's pretty wild. And that shows how good this program's been. I say all that to say, you can even scroll back to the 80s and 90s and see that the high standard that Carolina's set and why it is what it is today. But when I look at going back to that 1920 season, heck, when I look at these last, 6 or so seasons, and I compare them to the rest going back 40, 50 years, is it fair to say that where Carolina's at right now is maybe, I don't want to say the worst position they've been in, but the closest they've been to turning into an Indiana, a UCLA post Wooden? And I'm not trying to be harsh, but the numbers don't lie here, AJ.
Yeah.
Just go to Sports Reference and search UNC basketball history, 115 seasons, and just look. And to me, Carolina's as close as it's ever been to, I don't want to use the term irrelevancy because that's not the right way to say it, but to where mediocrity and averageness becomes kind of the norm. And being a number 1 seed and being a 2 seed and competing for national titles and winning ACC regular season is kind of like, yeah, if that happens, great, but that's not a realistic expectation anymore. You think Carolina's as close as it's been in quite some time?
So I was scrolling through Twitter/X last night. When I went to bed, I like to do that. And I happened to stumble upon a tweet Carolina basketball put out when the NCAA tournament selections were revealed. And I had to do a double take because it had 2 1s with a bunch of players over it. And it was an 11 seed. Like, we're in. And I thought, damn, that's Colorado. That's Mississippi State. That's Washington. No, it was North Carolina.
I mean, that's the lowest seed Carolina's had, right?
Ever been.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did something the other day where I noted all the different seeds. They've been a 1 or a 2 seed more than everything else combined.
Which, again, just shows the history and the expectations that come with this program, which is why we're having this conversation.
This is the worst 6-year stretch since the period around where Dean got there. Really, in the 50s, they had, a 12 and 15, like back-to-back years.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's more worrying, too, because even in the Doherty era, AJ, there was always this shining light of Roy Williams out there who they had tried to get before of they've got that. So, he can probably fix things, and he ultimately did. the reason I'm bringing up the question too is I'm looking at it. I'm saying, and we've talked about this before. Let's say it doesn't work out next season. Hubert is gone. Who the hell do you go out and get? There's not a clear candidate out there.
You had the 6 years between Dean and Roy. You had the 3 Guthridge and 3 Doherty years. And I know Guthridge went to 2 Final Fours in 3 years. But the program was trending rapidly the wrong direction. They should have won a title in 98, didn't. The 6-man starting lineup thing just defied logic then and defies logic even more now. The next year, they lost in the first round, the Weber State game. And then the year after that, they had they were 22 and 14. They got to a Final Four. They were 18 and 13. They got in over Virginia, even though Virginia beat them twice. And they get to a Final Four, and it's like that washes away the regular season, which it shouldn't. It never should, because the whole of the season is what should matter. He retired. They hired Doherty. Doherty's first year, when Peppers and Curry come over from football, Carolina was struggling, and boom, Curry's starting point guard, Peppers the 6th man. They win 16 straight, the number 1 in the country. And then they lost the last 5 Sundays of the season. I've told the story about Forte and Capel and Peppers and not passing the ball to Forte and the crap that was going on the court in that locker room. It was unraveling already under Doherty. The next year was an absolute chaotic mess. The year after that was a chaotic mess, and they played in the NIT, and they had Roy out there to save the program. Dean asked him to come home one more time, and he couldn't say no. For as corny as old Roy can be to some people, you've got to love that loyalty. And you got to love how much Dean Smith meant to him. He couldn't say no, and he saved the program. There should be a statue of Roy Williams out front of the Smith Center, a massive statue. He saved the program. Saved it. So now they're in a situation where there is no Roy out there, none. There's a tremendous amount of fear and apprehension for a lot of people about the idea of going outside the family, because there's still something special about Carolina. And I see this when I go places when they're on the road or in the NCAA tournament, and other media views UNC walking in as a different kind of royalty because it's passed down, stays in the same bloodline. And it's a unique royalty that no one else really has. Duke, I guess, has that now because Shire's passed down from K. Mm-hmm. And Duke's been so good for a long time, and Shire's getting it done. But Carolina's is a different kind of royalty because it goes back, it precedes Kennedy being assassinated.
Yeah. So
when they come into town, I always get questions. There's always a fascination. Other media will tell you there's reporters that are at those games that aren't at the other ones. And there's a comfort with people when you look at Hubert Davis. You're placing Carolina in time, and it just doesn't change. It's an amazing thing in sports that we have this, but it's teetering on the edge right now. And they don't have anywhere to go within the family. And there's a lot of people that are terribly afraid of losing that identity, because once they go outside the family, you can't go back in. You could hire someone from Carolina again. Mark Pope ended up at Kentucky, and they've gone outside their Kentucky family for a long time. After Joe B. Hall retired, he was an assistant there and then took over. But Carolina doesn't have that. And there's a tremendous amount of concern about no longer being Carolina once that's gone. And I think that needs to leave, because you can do it in other sports. Yeah. I mean, they didn't hire under the Sylvia Hatchell tree, and Courtney Bangart's doing a pretty good job. Yeah. You know, they like to do the family tree thing there, and it doesn't always work.
Well, it's you just talked about, reporters asking, when Carolina walks into there's the Carolina family kind of aspect. There's an aura with that, but that doesn't really matter if you're not winning games. Like, that fades away very quickly. You know what I mean? Like, it's great and all that, this guy played at Carolina. That's cool. But if you're, losing 14 games a season, then like that doesn't, to me, like, oh, it's in the family. That doesn't outweigh the fact that, well, yeah, it's cool and all, but like, you're not really a very good program anymore. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's great if you can do that and be successful, but if you're doing that and not being successful, to me, success outweighs this Carolina family thing every single day of the week.
If a dude walks in the room and he's got his hair parted down the middle and it's wing back and he's wearing an Izod shirt tucked in with an Izod belt and topsiders, people are going to say that's a unique guy. But good gracious, change with the times, brother. And Carolina's wearing Izod. I guess Carolina's more Ralph Lauren. They're more polo.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I don't wear a ton of polo shirts anymore. I've adapted and changed. Thanks to my wife.
I have noticed that. That's a good observation.
Ever since when Kim almost died, I promised her. I said, I'll wear what you want to games, and I'll grow crap on my face that my dad complains about, and all that because she wants it. So what the hell? But I'm adapting with the times. Mm-hmm. And Carolina, I'm not saying they have to go out and do that right now. I'm not saying it's not going to work, but they have to be prepared that staying with somebody just to maintain this family thing, to me, is not smart. Now, if Hubert's the guy, he'll show he's the guy. Year 5 is plenty of time. Coaches used to get 5 years, and there's a reason they got 5 years back in the day. We become very impatient with everything in society. Everything. So it's going to translate to sports as well. And, I mean, how pro coaches get fired after a year all the time. So we'll know after year 5 because now you can't use the GM thing as an excuse. Now you can't use NIL as an excuse, even though it really wasn't last spring, as I've said a trillion times. Year 5, you got to know what you're doing. There's some things that you got to learn and know what you're doing. Jacob Turner at THI in year 5 placed you in 2023. In 2023, you were much better employee at THI than you were in 2018, 2019. 1,000 times better. So Hubert had never been a head coach before. The JV thing doesn't count. So he should be much better in next season in year 5 than he was in year 1. And it's the mistakes. There's nothing wrong with making mistakes as long as you learn from them. Now, when there's a stubbornness about it and everyone else can see that doesn't work, but you keep doing it, and I'm not saying this is the case, and you refuse to change, that's a problem. If you can adapt and change, then no. That's why it's going to be really interesting what they do from a roster construction standpoint this spring, because the mission is to be elite. Hubert Davis was there from 89. I mean, his freshman year, they played in the second most epic ACC tournament championship game against Duke, the most physical one ever in 89. 90, he's on the floor when Rick Fox hits that shot. 91, they're in the Final Four. They play Kansas and Roy's third year. And then 92, Hubert had a great year, 20 points a game, first team all ACC, hit 35 in Cameron Indoor. They go to the Sweet 16 Sweet 16 that year. And that was that. Hubert moves on. So he was there when Carolina was at its zenith. It was the program. He was there before Duke won championships. And Carolina was still the biggest dog on the block. They were it in college basketball. Now, Georgetown had its run. UNLV had its run. But Carolina was the constant. So he knows what Carolina elite is. He knows it as well as anyone. He was on the team as a player, and he was on the staff as an assistant. He knows what it takes. The question is, will he and Jim Tanner and the Carolina culture get to that point? If they don't get to that point, then based on conversations I've had, they're going to do what they can to get there. If it's not him, I guess it would be somebody else. But he's got a great opportunity now, and he's got an opportunity to have an amazing year 5. Then people are going to forget all the things they thought this year. Yeah.
100%. Again, I'll keep saying I don't think you're ever as far away as you think you are, especially in today's portal era, especially when you got North Carolina written across the jersey and the resources that Carolina has, like you've talked about. So it's all about making the right moves in the offseason, getting the right guys to come in, not only in terms of their physical talents, but again, I think that mental aspect is we've seen with guys.
Yeah.
There's a few guys you can point out, and I'm not going to name names, but there are guys you can point out from the Hubert Davis era and the portal era that haven't worked out. And I think a lot of it wasn't necessarily the talent. A lot of it was, it's different playing for Carolina, man. Again, this ain't Georgia Tech.
Jacob, the problem is in a baseball world, it's not like, well, we just got to get better in the bullpen and we'll be in good shape. I mean, they need a new infield, a new outfield. They need a new lineup. They need a new pitching staff. They need a couple new starters. They need a new hitting coach. I mean, they need all kinds of things. They need a better farm system. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
There's 91.9, 67.4. 33 minutes out of 245 in the quad one games against NCAA tournament teams they led. They were thoroughly outclassed. There's a lot of growing to do, but as you said, we could probably conclude with this, the opportunity's there. Louisville did it. Kentucky did it overnight. I don't think Carolina's going to have to change that much because there are parts there. But this is a wonderful opportunity for the new era of Hubert Davis with a GM and money that he's not worried as much about spending. Someone else is doing it. It's a wonderful opportunity for North Carolina to sort of reinvent itself to become elite while staying Carolina in the current climate.
And what a story it'll be if he can do that. And again, massive offseason ahead.
So it'll be if he can't.
Yeah, exactly. Either way, we'll know. This time a year from now, we'll know. We'll know if it worked out or not. And it'll be fascinating no matter what direction it ends up going in. But yeah, a lot of work to be done this offseason. We'll obviously be here to cover every second of it and get involved in the comments. Let us know if you agree with what we're saying. Let us know what you think it takes for Carolina to get back to that elite status. Let us know maybe even players you've seen in the portal that you think would potentially be good fits and you'd like to see in a Carolina uniform next season, because I think it's going to be a lot of different and interesting opinions coming out of that. So yeah, we'll get involved in the comments below. We'd love to hear from everybody. Make sure you like, make sure you share, hit the notification bell, and subscribe too. And also real quickly, AJ, head on over to Twitter and Facebook, like our pages over there. We're going to be giving away some free Tar Heel Illustrated. And AJ, I know you're in the process right now of giving away some free Tar Heel Illustrated because we did hit the 12K mark on the Facebook side. Any idea when you're going to have those out? I know you're busy, but soonish.
Yeah,
maybe next week,
I notified someone last night. So I got a couple more for Facebook to do.
Sweet.
One or two more for Facebook to do. So I'll announce them once they're all notified.
Sweet. Looking forward to that, man. And big thank you to everybody that has done what we've asked and just gone to like those channels. I mean, that's one way we're trying to reward you guys is by giving away some from free subscriptions. And again, those are $8.33 a month, and it comes out to over $100 a year. So yeah, it's a good value, and there's a ton of stuff, particularly right now during this portal season, that you're going to get that you just can't have access to unless you're signed up over there. David Sisk is absolutely killing it, man. He's already going. We're early in the portal. AJ, portal opened on Monday. David's already killing it.
Good. Amazing. He texted me. I'm not going to say the name of the player. I mentioned a player that's in the portal, but I think would be a very interesting fit. And David's response was, on it.
So that'll be on the boards at sometime soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, he'll be on the phone with the kid's high school coach or AAU coach at the minimum, probably by now.
Probably knows the guy already too. So
yeah, he's so connected. It's wild.
Yeah, no, he's fantastic, and there's not
a number he can't get.
No, and that's why you're signed up again. We can't just give away that for free. There's a lot of hard work that goes into doing that, developing those relationships. Yeah, and it costs money too. Absolutely.
Got to pay him. Got to pay you. Got to pay Brian. Brian's making the big bucks. Brian's crushing it on the football recruiting front right now.
All over it. Absolutely all over it. So yeah, the staff's been doing a fantastic job, and we're going to continue to pump out as much fantastic content as we can. And again, the things you can do for free are just like, share, subscribe, and tell everybody about us, because it is a massive, massive help. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. Another edition of the THI podcast. We appreciate you guys watching as always, and I'm sure we'll see y'all again soon. Thanks.